Have you had an encounter with Mr. or Mrs. Tall, Dark, and Scary, and you'd like to share it with this channel? Well, if so, get busy and send me an email with all the details. Don't leave anything out. You can send your email to contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Buckeye Bigfoot, and thank you for understanding about Friday. As you can tell, my voice is back. So grab your snackage because we got a long one tonight. Head on up and get on into the saddle, and let's move out. We're ready for our journey down into Sasquatch Valley. Let's go. I was going through a divorce, so a friend of mine said, "Let's go camping this weekend." I said to myself, "That's a great idea." So I told him, "Yes, let's do that." The location is in the Northeast in the New York, New Jersey area. That weekend, my buddy came to my house at 3 a.m. I already had my backpack ready and my .45 ACP handgun on my side. We drove about 3.5 hours and finally arrived. It was about 7 a.m. when we arrived at the campsite. My buddy said, "Too many people here. Let's go deeper in the woods." Although we didn't see anyone, we could hear them, so I agreed. It was early September, so the weather was still good, about 70 to 80 degrees midday, but I didn't mind. I was accustomed to rough, hard terrain. I was in the military and had been Special Forces for 8 years, so we walked for about 45 minutes. We came to a small clearing, and I said, "This looks like a great spot. Plus, there's a creek about 40 yards away." We set up camp and walked around for about 3 hours. Everything was normal, and I was really relaxed. When we got back, I told my buddy, "I'm going to the creek to try some fishing." After arriving at the creek, I noticed it had a deep section to it and figured it would be better fishing in that area, although it was very dense with vegetation. I started fishing for about 20 minutes before I caught a trout, a nice-sized one. While I was reeling it in, a deer jumped in the water and literally swam to my side, about 30 feet away from me. I thought that was very odd. They usually want to stay away from humans. When it reached the bank, it looked with urgency behind it. I thought maybe it was waiting for a companion or a baby. I noticed it was hitting the ground with its hooves. I know that's one of the warnings they give other deer. But this wasn't a hunting area, so it couldn't be a hunter there. I thought it might be a black bear. After a few minutes, the deer ran away. As I was fishing, I heard a grunt. I dismissed it as the black bear being frustrated, not getting the deer, and that it didn't want to come into the area I was in. However, for some reason, I felt like something was not right. I felt as if I was stalked or watched. With my military background, I always knew when danger was around, but figured I'm frustrated with my personal life, what with the divorce and all, and I just must be more sensitive, and it's probably nothing. So I didn't give it a second thought. However, I wanted to get out of there so that my anxiety would go away. I realized I forgot to clean and gut the fish. But on the way back to camp, I found some wild mushrooms and some wild peppermint and wild fresh garlic. My buddy was so excited, I brought back 2 fish that were fresh caught and all the other items. He was so excited he offered to clean the fish while I made us some peppermint tea. He went off to clean them. After 5 minutes, he came back with the fish cleaned, but also with a deep cut between his right thumb and his index finger. It was pretty deep, but he thought it would be okay, and he wouldn't need any medical attention. I told him he needs stitches, and that I had a medical kit with me, and I would stitch it up for him. But he declined, probably out of fear that it was me doing it. After dinner, his bleeding had not stopped. I told him on the way here that I saw a 24-hour clinic about 3 miles from the campsite entrance. He thought about it and said he should go. I offered to go with him, so we left everything there. We did extinguish the fire, and we took our wallets and my .45. When we got to the clinic, they told him that his injury was worse than he thought. He had partially cut a tendon, and it was hanging by a thread. He would need a hand surgeon to do it at the local hospital. So I drove him to the hospital about 30 minutes away. To make a long story short, the surgeon said that he would need to stay overnight. So we decided that I would go back to the campsite, stay there for the night, and the next day at 10 a.m., when the surgeon would see him and release him, I would go back and pick him up. It wasn't an easy hike back in the dark, alone. It wasn't so much that me being afraid. I had been behind enemy lines before with soldiers looking for me because they spotted me parachuting into the woods, and that, I must admit, had me a bit scared. But I just felt that someone was watching and following me, as I heard footsteps walking when I walked and when I stopped. They were very subtle. The normal person would not detect them as I did, but I knew they were there. I finally reached camp, and it was about 10:30 p.m. The tents were partially taken down, and the few fruits I had were taken. I assumed it was a raccoon or a small bear. I built a large campfire so that it would keep them away, and I went to sleep. At about 2:30 a.m., I heard footsteps around my tent, and they didn't sound like an animal. They sounded human. I got my handgun and had it ready to fire if needed as I cautiously listened. I heard the small coffee pot being knocked over, so I knew the person was at least 10 feet away from me, because the coffee pot was next to a tree to the right of my tent. I slowly unzipped the tent window about 1 inch just to see the person, and I almost wish I hadn't unzipped it. It was a large, human ape-like beast, about 10 feet tall, with shoulders spanning about 4 to 5 feet wide. I sat in the center of my tent and chambered a bullet in my gun, very slowly under my sleeping bag to muffle the sound. I put my boots on and laid flat with my head next to a tree that my tent was anchored on to protect my head if attacked. I sat there, ready to unload if attacked. It came by my tent and stood over it, sniffing. Now I could smell the mustiest smell that I've ever smelled. I could see the shadow of it from the campfire. I held my breath so it wouldn't hear me, and just as fast as it came, it disappeared. I did not sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I started to break down both tents and gather everything to leave as fast as I could. I had seen the massive footprints. My shoe size is 11.5, and you could fit 2 of my shoes in that print. I also saw the branch on the tree it stood next to, and the branch was 11.5 feet up, and the top of its head was very close to it, so it was over 10 feet tall. Keep in mind, I have to carry both backpacks back, and I was trying to use a cord to tie them together to make it easier to carry back. I finally got them attached to each other. As I bent over to grab them and put them on my back, I was in a crouched position. That's when I heard a grunt-like sound to my right. As I turned around, holding both backpacks with both hands and knowing my gun was holstered to my hip, I already thought to myself, if that's the creature, I'm screwed. I have no time to react. As I turned, I saw it. It was huge, really, really huge, majestic-like. It stood about 8 feet away from me, with its long arms to its side, looking at me with an angry face. My training immediately kicked in, and I thought to myself, you're in no position to shoot it or run, so let it know you are no threat to it. I used what I was taught in training. I slowly let go of the backpacks, remaining in the crouched position, not making any eye contact so it didn't feel that I was challenging it. I put both of my arms up slowly, with my palms facing it, open. I sat on the ground and crossed my legs Indian style. I half closed my eyes and began to slowly blink them while saying in a soft voice, I'm not here to hurt you or your family. I'm sorry if I did anything that upsets you. I mean you no harm, so please don't harm me. Let me leave in peace." I didn't know if he understood me, but I remained in that position with my head down, but still able to see his feet. I should mention from the time I first saw him until now was about a half a minute. I noticed as I spoke to him, and yes, it was him. I could tell it was a him. Well, unless he had 3 arms. But as I spoke to him, his head twisted to the side, like a dog's does when it's trying to understand something. Also, he had pure intelligence in his eyes. I could see it. After about a minute, I saw him walking towards me. I didn't know what to do. Should I reach for my gun or try to run? I just didn't know, so I thought sitting there with my head down and my hands up was the best thing to do. I thought, if he attacks me, I will figure it out from there. He got right up to me. I was so scared. I've been shot at by soldiers before, but this was scarier than that. I felt my lips twitching. I closed my eyes and maintained slow breathing. Suddenly, I felt a gentle touch to my hand, then to the other hand. It was a real gentle touch, as if trying to figure out what I was made of. Then he gave out a soft grunt, and I felt him sniffing my head with my hat on. He removed my hat and sniffed my hair, and then touched it. Throughout all of this, I could smell such a strong, musky smell. Really strong, almost like humans after being dead for a week. And yes, I've smelled that before, so I can make an accurate comparison. He then palmed my head with one hand, like a basketball. Then he picked up my face to look at me. I closed my eyes so he wouldn't feel threatened. He started to grunt, touching my eyes, so I assumed he wanted me to open my eyes, and I did. Now keep in mind that throughout this whole time, my hands are still up. It's been almost 3 to 4 minutes, and my hands are starting to shake from the stress of being up. He bent over and sniffed my head, then grabbed my hand and sniffed it strongly. He then put his hand, which was the size of a catcher's mitt, in front of my face, and he grunted while shaking his hand in front of my face. I assumed he wanted me to smell his hand, so I bent my head and started making loud sniffing noises so that he knew I did what he wanted. Now one hand was up and one hand was down. The one that was down was on the same side of my gun, so I was already thinking of my next move, if attacked. He then pushed my other hand down and grabbed me from under my armpits, then lifted me up with no effort. I am 6 foot 5 inches and 280 pounds lean, but it's still 280 pounds. I lowered my legs and stood up, still keeping my head down. He picked up my head and put his hand on his chest, and he said, "Ha-tu-ha." I'm not sure of the spelling, so there you go. That's what I heard. Then he pointed at me, and I assumed he wanted to know my name. So to make it easy for him, I said Vic instead of Victor. Then he said it. He said Vic. He actually said Vic and pointed at me. Then I said, "Ha-tu-ha," and pointed at him. He made a squeaky noise and a partial smile. He then sat down and gestured for me to do the same, so I did. He pointed at the fire. I thought he wanted me to make a fire, so I did. He was so fascinated with the lighter that I used to start the fire. I gave him the lighter to feel it, but he couldn't get his fingers in the loop to push the button to ignite the light, so I motioned for him to wait. I retrieved my hunting knife. I placed it on the fire to make it hot. Then I used it to melt the plastic and cut away the loop from the lighter so that he could ignite it. He was then able to ignite it, and he played with it for a while. It seemed that he knew what fire was, but he didn't have the means to make it. Then suddenly he got up. I went to get up as well, but he put his hand on my shoulder and sat me back down. He came back with some leaves and 2 rocks, One seemed to be an igniter and the other a striker. After hitting them together for a few minutes, I do believe the one was flint, he made fire. I gestured to him to wait with my hands. I got 2 sticks, and I made a fire with the sticks. Then I took out a 9-volt battery from my GPS, took a piece of wire from my charger, and connected the wire to the positive and the negative of the battery. It soon got red hot. I touched the wire to the leaves and ignited them. He gave out a loud grunt, throwing his hands up, smiling. Well, I assume that's his laugh. Then I drew a picture of a family in the dirt and pointed at him. He pointed at the woman and pointed 3 times at the children. He then cupped his hands to his chest, making a round symbol like a breast. Then he pointed 1 time at the child. Then he pointed to himself again, and then he pointed 2 times at the children. I assumed that he meant he had 1 girl and 2 boys. He then pointed at the drawing for me to tell him. I pointed at the women. I considered trying to explain my divorce, but opted not to. Then I pointed 2 times at the children, then pointing at myself, trying to say I had 2 boys. I took my hand and drew lots of family members, trying to ask if he had other family. He drew me about 30 different figures. I couldn't understand all of them, but I knew 3 of them were dead, as he pointed at them, then closed his eyes with a sad face. So I did the same thing about my dad. I gestured to ask if he was hungry by rubbing my stomach and putting my hand to my mouth. He rubbed his stomach and put his hand by his mouth, so I got up, grabbed my telescopic fishing pole, and waved my hand for him to follow me. I put my fly on and began to fish. He walked into the deep part, and in 2 minutes he had a fish. He threw it up on the bank, and before you knew it, he had 6 fish caught, and I had caught none. He brought the fish and took one, ripped it in half with his mouth, and gave me 1/2 to eat, for him to eat the other half. I gestured with my hands to wait and proceeded to the camp, picking up mushrooms and garlic and mint for tea. When I got back, I put 3 fish on the fire, but not gutting them. I gave him 2 to eat, cautioning him it was hot. He loved the fish, but he wanted more, so I cooked him the rest of the fish. He saw that I didn't eat the guts from the fish and asked if he could have them, so I gave them to him. I made mint tea afterwards, but it seemed he knew what mint was because he was eating it raw. After the tea was ready, I put sugar in it. He pointed at the sugar, and I put some in his hand. He licked it and seemed to like it. He also enjoyed the tea, although he spilled it all over, trying to hold the cup. He ended up pouring it in his hand and slurped it up instead. Afterwards, he pointed at my gun. I tried to gesture to him, "It's no good and dangerous." I wasn't sure he understood me, so I got up, took my tent folded, and I hung it on the tree. I backed up about 30 feet and put my hand on my ears, trying to tell him to do the same. Finally he did. I took my hands and spread them apart, making an explosion noise. I didn't want him to freak out. I then shot the tent. He was startled, but he was okay. When I showed him the tent and the hole, he understood right away. I showed him a bullet and showed him the bullet traveling to my body. Then I closed my eyes, showing that I would die. He took a branch and put it to his shoulder, and he was trying to show me a rifle, and he made deer-like walking motions with his fingers. I understood that he was saying that others come there with rifles and shoot deer. I tried to tell him to stay away from those people and others like me, that they will hurt him. They have guns that they can shoot from far away. I think he understood. I looked at the watch, and it was now already 11 a.m. He then gestured to me by pointing at his family, then rubbing his stomach, that he had to leave to get food for his family, and he stood up. I gave him the lighter and 2 sleeping bags. I showed him how to use the items. I also showed him my bullhorn and tried to let him understand that whenever I'm around, I would blow my bullhorn 3 times, then once more after the 3 times. I think he understood, but I would find out on my next encounter. But I'll leave that for another time. Now, just so you know, I've only told 2 people about this. First, my now deceased dad, who believed me, and my second wife, who also believed me. I told no one else because I know most will not believe me and would start to think that I'm crazy. Not that I care, but I did not want to get into an argument over it, so I never told anyone but the 2 people that I mentioned. Well, I guess now everyone knows. There is much more to the story, but I will write again after I see the reaction to this. This story is 100% true, and nothing is made up. If you do not believe me, so be it. I could have brought some others with me, or took a picture of him with me. But I in no way want to endanger him and his family, so I don't care to bring any proof of him. It really does not matter to me at the end of the day. You may use my first name, Victor, but not my last name, please. And please, let me know if you would like part 2. Thank you, Victor. Well, Victor, you bet I want a part 2, and parts 3 and 4 if you've got them. And I'm sure I'm not the only one intrigued with this story, so please do give us whatever you've got. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to keep it pretty short here on the back end. I just want to say thank you for understanding for no video last week, and thank you for staying with me tonight to the end of the journey. It's always so much better with your company. All right, everyone. Until we meet up again, please always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.